She thought school trips were harmless, until luxury cars lined the curb, and the man she ran from years ago locked eyes with the child she never told him about. Where are you listening from today? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more dramatic Mafia romance stories with shocking reunions and protective heroes, don't forget to subscribe. This story is just getting started. The permission slip lay on the counter beneath a magnet shaped like a smiling sun, its corners already curled from being read and reread. She signed her name slowly, carefully, as if neat handwriting could somehow protect what she was agreeing to. Black ink, straight line, no hesitation. Just another form among dozens she'd filled out since becoming a mother. Field trips, library cards, emergency contacts that always listed only her name. She slid the paper into her son's backpack and zipped it closed. "Did you put the juice box?" he asked, already tugging on his sneakers, hopping on one foot with the uncontained energy of someone who had never known real danger. "In the front pocket," she said, forcing a smile. "Apple, your favorite." "And the crackers? Next to it?" He nodded solemnly, satisfied. The matter was settled. The world was as it should be. The morning sun filtered through their small kitchen window, soft and forgiving. Outside, the neighborhood was already alive with ordinary sounds, garbage trucks, the distant bark of a dog, a neighbor's radio playing something cheerful and forgettable. It was a school morning like any other, and she clung to that normalcy with quiet desperation. Ordinary days means safety, she reminded herself. She'd repeated it for years, like a mantra. Ordinary streets, ordinary schools, ordinary routines. If she kept things small and predictable, if she never drew attention, never stood out, never said the wrong name out loud, then nothing would come crashing through the careful life she'd built. And he slung the backpack over his shoulders and grinned at her, missing one of his front teeth. "We're going to the museum today," he said. "Ms. Carter says they have dinosaur bones." "I know," she replied, heart softening despite herself. "Have fun." He ran to the door, then paused as he always did. "You'll be here when I get back?" The question was innocent, routine, but it still struck something raw in her chest every single time. "Always," she said. "I'll be right here." He accepted that answer easily, because children believed promises were unbreakable things. He opened the door, then turned back suddenly and wrapped his arms around her waist in a spontaneous hug. "You smell like coffee," he said. She laughed quietly and kissed the top of his head. "Go, you're going to be late." She watched him walk down the front steps, small and confident, joining the flow of children headed toward the school at the end of the block. Parents clustered near the crosswalk, some chatting, some scrolling phones, all of them wrapped in the same shared assumption that nothing bad happened in broad daylight. She waited until he disappeared through the school gates before exhaling. Only then did her shoulders sag. Trust was a daily choice. Not in people, but in the idea that the past would stay where she left it. That the life she'd escaped would not find cracks in this quieter world. She trusted routines, schedules, the visibility of teachers and parents and rules. She trusted places where violence didn't belong. A school, a field trip, a sign-in sheet. She locked the door behind her and stood in the silence of the house, staring at the space where her son had been moments before. There were days when she forgot, almost forgot, what it had cost to give him this version of life. Days when the fear dulled just enough to feel like something she'd outgrown. Today felt like one of those days. She rinsed his cereal bowl, wiped down the counter, and checked the clock. Plenty of time before pickup. Plenty of time to pretend everything was normal. She didn't know that in less than an hour the sound of engines would shatter the quiet. That black vehicles would line a street meant for minivans and bicycles. That a man she had erased from her future would step out into her present. Polished, powerful, unmistakable. She didn't know that the permission slip she'd signed so carefully hadn't just authorized a school trip. It had trusted the world. And the world was about to remind her how thin that trust really was. The first sound didn't belong there. It wasn't loud, not at first. It was low and deliberate, The kind of engine note that didn't rev for attention, but announced itself by existing. A deep, steady purr that cut through the usual school morning noise of children shouting and parents laughing too loudly into their phones. She was halfway across the street with another mother when she heard it. Her head lifted instinctively. 3 black sedans turned the corner in perfect formation, glossy and oversized against the backdrop of painted crosswalks and crooked, slow school zone signs. Their windows were tinted just enough to keep secrets. They didn't hesitate, didn't drift, didn't behave like lost drivers or commuters trying to find parking. They moved like they knew exactly where they were going. Conversation around her stuttered. Someone laughed nervously. Wow, must be somebody important. The cars rolled to a stop one after the other, parallel to the curb, blocking half the street. Another vehicle followed, longer, heavier, its presence commanding in a way that made the air feel thicker. Doors remained closed. Engines idled. The symmetry was wrong. Too clean. Too controlled. Her stomach tightened. She took a step back without realizing she was moving, her pulse climbing in a way that had nothing to do with motherhood or caffeine, and everything to do with memory. This wasn't new. Not to her. She'd heard this sound before, outside hotels and warehouses, outside places where men didn't ask permission before taking what they came for. This sound belonged to another life. A teacher by the gate frowned. Is there a delivery or something scheduled today? I think it's for the museum trip, another parent said. They mentioned a donor, right? Some sponsor? The word donor made her chest constrict. The rear door of the lead car opened. She didn't see him yet, only polished black shoes touching the asphalt, stepping out calmly, without hurry. A tall man followed, scanning the street with professional disinterest. Another door opened, then another. She felt it before she saw him. The shift. The way the atmosphere recalibrated itself around a presence it recognized even if it didn't understand it. He emerged slowly, as if time moved differently where he stood. Tailored suit. Dark. Impeccable. His movements unhurried, deliberate, radiating quiet authority. Not flashy, not theatrical, just undeniable. Her breath caught. For a moment she thought she might be imagining it, some cruel trick of fear and memory stitching a stranger into a familiar shape. But then he lifted his head, and the world tilted. It was him. Older, yes. Sharper. The softness he once carried buried beneath control and discipline. His hair was shorter, his jaw lined with something colder than youth, but there was no mistaking those eyes. The same eyes that had once searched her face for truth in the dark. The same eyes that had promised safety and danger in the same breath. Her vision narrowed. She reached blindly behind her, her hand grazing the fence to keep herself upright. Parents were whispering now. Who is that? Is he supposed to be here? Why are there so many cars? The principal hurried forward, her smile tight but professional. Mr. Castelli? Thank you so much for your generous contribution. The name hit her like a blade between the ribs. Castelli! Of course it was. He shook the principal's hand with practiced ease, his expression polite, composed. Happy to support the community, he said smoothly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard. Education matters. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, nausea rolling in sharp and sudden. Community. Education. Words he knew how to use. Masks he wore expertly. She wanted to run. But then she saw the reason she couldn't. Her son. He stood near the gate with his class, fidgeting with the strap of his backpack, his attention caught by the cars like everyone else's. Curious. Unafraid. His head tilted slightly, a familiar angle. And the man turned. Just briefly. Not toward the adults. Not toward the principal or the teachers. Toward the children. Toward her child. His gaze stopped. Locked. Something in his face changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just a flicker. A pause that shouldn't have lasted more than a heartbeat, but stretched into something dangerous. Recognition didn't strike. Curiosity did. And in that instant, she knew with chilling certainty. The ordinary day was over. The engines idled behind him like a warning, and the past long patient had finally arrived. The principal's voice carried farther than it should have, bright and practiced, the kind of tone meant to reassure parents and excite children. A microphone squealed briefly, then settled. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," she said, smiling broadly. "Before the buses depart, we'd like to thank a very special supporter who made today's museum trip possible." Applause began immediately, polite, automatic. The kind people gave at fundraisers and school assemblies without fully knowing why. She didn't clap. Her hands had gone numb at her sides, her fingers tingling like she'd stepped into winter without gloves. She watched the principal gesture toward the man standing just behind her shoulder. "Our generous donor," the principal continued, "has contributed not only transportation, but additional educational programming for our students this year." More applause. Whispers threaded through the crowd. "That explains the buses." "Wow, must be loaded. Is he famous?" The man inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the attention without seeking it. He smiled. Not the smile she remembered from years ago. Easy and reckless, but a controlled version. Professional. Safe. He looked like he belonged here. That was the most terrifying part. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This wasn't an accident. Not a coincidence. Not even curiosity. This was intention. "Education is an investment," he said smoothly when the principal stepped aside, "and investing in the next generation is something I take seriously." His voice was calm, warm, resonant. Parents nodded. Teachers smiled. Someone murmured approval. She could barely hear anything past the roar of blood in her ears. Her son tugged lightly on her coat sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, eyes wide, "that man has a lot of cars." She swallowed hard. "Yes," she managed. "He does." The man's gaze flickered again toward the children, toward her son, and lingered half a second longer than it should have. She saw the calculation this time, the quiet focus sharpening behind his eyes. He was no longer just observing. He was measuring. She turned her body subtly, angling herself so she blocked her son from direct view. The movement was instinctive, maternal, futile. The applause died down. The principal beamed. "Let's all give Mr. Castelli another round of thanks." Clapping erupted again, louder this time. She didn't move. Her breath came shallow now. Cold spread through her chest, the kind of cold she hadn't felt in years. The kind that belonged to another version of herself. The woman she had been when her life was governed by silence and survival, rather than school schedules and snack rotations. She had told herself that world couldn't touch her here. She had been wrong. The principal leaned in to whisper something to him, then gestured toward the buses. Children began lining up, teachers herding them into neat rows. Parents snapped photos, some already posting updates about the exciting sponsor. She felt dizzy. This was happening in daylight, in front of witnesses, in front of her child. "He's fancy," her son said, craning his neck to look again. "Is he famous?" "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. "He's just helping the school." Her son nodded, satisfied. Children accepted simple explanations easily. Adults didn't get that luxury. The man, Castelli, stepped closer to the group of students, his presence drawing attention despite how little he demanded it. One of the teachers laughed nervously as he spoke to her, thanked her for her work. Another parent leaned in, eager, impressed. She felt trapped in plain sight. Running was impossible. Confrontation would only expose what she'd worked so hard to hide. She searched his face for signs of triumph, of recognition, of anger. Found none. Only patience. Focus. That scared her more than rage ever could. Because rage was reactive. This was deliberate. The principal called out names, organizing attendance. Her son's name rang out clearly, and he raised his hand, proud, stepping forward. The man watched him do it. She felt something inside her fracture. This wasn't just about money or a school trip. This wasn't generosity. This was a man who had arrived where he didn't belong, wearing the right mask, smiling at the right people, standing far too close to a truth she'd buried. The applause faded completely. Engines still idled, and in the sudden lull between routine and revelation, she realized something with sick clarity. He hadn't found her in secret. He had found her publicly, and there would be no disappearing now, not without tearing a child's world apart. It started with stillness. Amid the chaos of children lining up, teachers calling instructions, parents laughing too loudly to mask unease, he went completely still. She noticed it because stillness had always been his tell. The world moved around him, but he did not move with it. His attention narrowed, sharpened, fixing onto a single point with a precision that made her heart pound in warning. Her son laughed at something another boy said, head tipped back, carefree. The sound carried across the playground, bright and unguarded. The man's gaze found him, and didn't look away. At first, it was just observation. A longer glance than polite curiosity required. He leaned slightly forward, as if adjusting his sightline, as if the angle mattered. Her breath caught. She recognized the look now. Not anger, not affection, but calculation. Fighting disbelief, the boy shifted his weight. His stance mirrored the man's in a way so subtle it felt obscene. 1 foot forward, shoulders squared instinctively, not defensively, but with quiet confidence. It had always been there. She had just prayed no one else would see it. The man's jaw tightened. Just once. Around them, conversation continued, oblivious. Backpacks on the bus, everyone. Remember your buddy. I packed extra snacks if anyone needs. The world felt too loud, too normal, too fragile. Her son glanced up then, curiosity drawing his eyes across the crowd until they met the man's gaze directly. The moment stretched thin. Something passed between them, unspoken and immediate. The boy didn't flinch, didn't look away. He studied the man with the open wonder of a child encountering something new and strangely familiar. The man inhaled sharply. She felt it like a physical blow. That was recognition. Not certainty yet, but the crack in it. She moved without thinking, stepping slightly into the line of sight, her hand tightening on her son's shoulder. "Hey," she said softly. "Eyes on your class, okay?" He nodded, obedient as always, and turned back toward his friends. Just like that, the spell broke. But the damage was done. The man didn't relax. He watched her son from beneath lowered lashes now, composure fully restored on the surface. His gaze flicked from the boy to her and back again. Pinned her. She refused to meet his eyes. If she did, she might scream, or beg, or collapse into the truth she had sworn to protect. She felt exposed, flayed in the open. Her pulse roared in her ears. She had lived 8 years believing resemblance was something she could disguise with enough distance and silence. That nurture would soften nature. That time would blur bloodlines. But blood remembered itself. She'd seen it. So had he. The principal gestured again, calling parents to step back from the gate. "We'll take good care of them," she assured cheerfully. "Don't worry." "Don't worry." The phrase echoed hollowly. The man stepped aside at last, allowing children to pass onto the bus. His posture was casual again, polite, but his eyes followed one child as if drawn by gravity. Her son climbed the steps of the bus, turned and waved. She waved back with a smile that nearly broke her. The man saw the wave, saw who it was for, and something settled behind his eyes then. Something colder than curiosity, and far more dangerous. Decision. The buses pulled away one by one, engines roaring, tires rolling over the painted lines of the crosswalk like erasing chalk marks on pavement. The playground emptied quickly. Parents dispersed, chatting, laughing, returning to lives untouched by revelation. She stood frozen, staring at the space where her son had been. The man approached slowly. Not aggressively. Not yet. She felt him before she heard him, the weight of his presence pressing into the fragile bubble of normalcy she'd been clinging to. "You did well," he said quietly, stopping at a respectful distance. "He's calm." Her heart stuttered. She turned to face him at last. Their eyes met across the cracked concrete of the playground. Two people bound by a history neither wanted exposed this way. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice low, controlled by sheer force of will. His gaze softened for the briefest moment, just enough to remind her of who he used to be. "Confirming a suspicion," he said. "One I hoped I was wrong about." She shook her head. "You should leave." "I will," he said easily, "for today." Her chest tightened. "But I won't pretend I didn't see him," he continued quietly. "And I won't pretend what I felt wasn't real." This wasn't a threat. It was a statement of truth. She watched him turn away, flanked by men who hadn't needed to move closer to assert control. As he walked back to the waiting cars, she realized with sudden, bone-deep clarity. The most dangerous thing wasn't that he had found her. It was that he had found his child. And he had looked at him not as leverage, but as something already his. They told her she was imagining it, not directly, not cruelly. Just through the casual blindness of people who had never been trained by fear to see patterns where others saw coincidence. "Kids all start to look alike after a while," another mother said with a laugh as the last bus disappeared down the street. "Same haircuts, same sneakers." A teacher added, smiling, "My nephew looks exactly like my neighbor's kid. It's funny how that works." She nodded, smiled, agreed. Inside, everything screamed, because it wasn't vague. It wasn't a maybe. It was bone deep and undeniable, the shape of her son's face when he listened. The way his eyes held stillness before movement. The calm he carried like quiet authority even at 8 years old. Those weren't learned. They were inherited. She walked home alone, the space beside her where her son usually skipped and chattered suddenly hollow. Each step felt heavier than the last, her mind replaying every moment the man's gaze had lingered. Eyes, the exact same shade. Dark, steady, unreadable unless you knew what to look for. The kind that unsettled adults without ever meaning to. Jaw, strong for a child. Angular. Set in the same way when he concentrated, when he made up his mind about something small, like refusing broccoli or insisting on tying his own shoes. Stillness. That was the one that haunted her. Children fidget. They bounce and wriggle and burn energy like it's endless. But her son went still when something mattered. He observed before acting. He watched rooms, absorbed tone, measured moments. Just like him. She unlocked the door and stood inside without turning on the lights, backpack silence weighing down the house. The walls felt closer than they had that morning. The familiar safety of the space felt compromised, as if unseen eyes had already memorized its dimensions. She pressed her forehead to the door and closed her eyes. "I should have known," she whispered. She'd told herself that love would change the math, that time would blur lines, that fate would lose interest if she stayed small enough. But fate wasn't blind. It was patient. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. Then buzzed again, and again. Unknown number. Her heart slammed into her ribs. She stared at the screen until the vibration stopped, forcing herself not to react. If she answered, she surrendered control. If she acknowledged him, the truth would no longer be something she could deny even privately. The phone buzzed again. A single text appeared. "We need to talk. No name. No signature." She didn't need one. Her fingers trembled as she typed. "There is nothing to discuss." The reply came instantly. "I disagree." She sank into a chair, breath shaking. Around her, the house held its silence. Toys neatly lined on shelves. A child's drawing taped to the refrigerator. Stick figures holding hands beneath a misspelled sun. She had built this life deliberately, carefully, brick by brick. And now those bricks felt suddenly fragile. How long, she wondered, had he noticed? At what point did suspicion turn into certainty? Had it been the eyes first? The angle of her son's head? Or the way he had watched him watch others? She typed again, sharper this time. "You saw a resemblance. That doesn't give you rights." The reply paused longer. When it came, it was measured. "I didn't come to assert rights." Her chest tightened. "Then why are you here?" Another pause. "Because denial is a luxury?" I lost the moment he looked back at me without fear. Her vision blurred. The worst part wasn't that he saw it. It was that no one else had. Teachers, parents, administrators. They all saw a generous donor and a confident boy. Only she and the man she had run from saw the truth standing between them, breathing, laughing, existing. A living echo of a past that refused to remain buried. Her phone vibrated again. He deserves to know who he is. She exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. "And you think that's you?" Minutes passed. When the reply finally came, it wasn't what she expected. "I think that's for you to decide." She stared at the words, pulse racing. For years, she had been the only one carrying the truth, the only one weighing safety against honesty, the only one deciding how much of the world her son was allowed to inherit. Now that truth stood inches away from discovery, and the most terrifying realization of all settled into her chest like a cold stone. She might not be able to protect him by hiding anymore, because blood, once seen, was impossible to unseen. The worst part was that nothing was wrong. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that made people believe in good outcomes. Teachers laughed in small clusters near the school entrance, clipboards tucked under their arms, voices warm with practiced reassurance. Parents lingered, trading complaints about packed lunches and lost socks, smiling the way people did when they believed the world was predictable. Her son's hand was wrapped tightly in hers. Warm, solid, trusting. That was how she knew she couldn't run. If she'd been alone, she might have turned the corner already, taken the long way home, packed a bag with shaking hands, and left behind everything but the essentials. She had done it before. She knew how to disappear. But her child was here, in daylight, in front of witnesses, and witnesses made everything fragile. The black cars were still parked along the street, engines quiet now, polished bodies catching the sun. They didn't scream danger to anyone else. To the other parents, they were impressive, symbols of success, wealth, generosity. To her, they were cages. She felt him before she saw him. That was the thing no one ever believed when she tried to explain it years ago. How presents could arrive first, how the air could change before a shadow ever crossed your path. Her spine stiffened, her breath shortened. Her son tugged her hand. "Mama, can I go show Miss Carter my drawing?" "Not yet," she said too quickly, then softened her voice when he looked up, confused. "In a minute." She scanned the playground without moving her head. Every sense stretched thin. Teachers, parents, children, safety vests, juice boxes. And then him. He stood a little apart, as if the crowd had unconsciously parted around him. Perfect suit, calm posture, no visible security, because he didn't need to advertise it. Men like him were protected by gravity itself. By an instinct everyone had to give them space without knowing why. His gaze found her instantly. There was no surprise in his expression. No anger, just certainty. That was worse. Her son shifted beside her, restless. Mama? She dropped her head slightly, pressing her lips to his hair, breathing him in. Stay with me, she murmured. Just stay close. His fingers tightened around hers, sensing something even if he didn't understand it. Children always did. She took a step back instinctively and immediately realized the mistake. There was nowhere to go. Behind her, parents pressed close, blocking the sidewalk in bursts of laughter and conversation. Ahead, teachers corralled children toward the bus line. And beside her, her child. She would not drag him into panic. She would not let fear announce itself in front of him. The man began walking toward them, slowly, deliberately, not rushing, not hiding. Each step measured, respectful, as if he understood exactly how thin the glass was between this moment and disaster. She felt her heart slam against her ribs. Her mind raced through old scenarios, old instincts screaming the same word over and over. Run. But where? Run would mean shouting. Running would mean questions. Running would mean her son looking back at her with fear instead of trust. She stayed where she was. Daylight pressed down on her shoulders like weight. Teachers watched him approach, smiles polite and curious. Parents glanced, intrigued by proximity to power. Someone whispered his name, the donor, the sponsor, and suddenly he was just a man walking toward a mother and child in front of a school. No guns, no threats, just reality. He stopped a careful distance away. Not close enough to frighten. Not far enough to pretend it wasn't intentional. Their eyes met. Years collapsed into a single breath. Pain flickered there. Control wrapped tightly around it. He looked at her first. Really looked. Not at her clothes or her posture, but at her face, the way she held herself too still, the way fear lived not on her surface, but beneath it, coiled and patient. Then his gaze drifted down, to the child. Her son looked back without flinching. Something primal crossed the man's face, not shock, not confusion. Recognition. She felt it like a blow. Mama, her son asked again, voice small now, uncertain. She bent, gripping his shoulders gently. It's okay, she said softly, forcing calm into every syllable. I'm right here. The man spoke at last, his voice low, steady, careful enough not to draw attention. I won't do this here, he said. The words weren't a command. They were a promise. She swallowed, her throat tight. You shouldn't have come. I didn't come for you, he replied quietly. That single sentence rearranged the world. Her son looked between them, brow furrowing. Do you know my mom? The man's eyes never left the boy. Yes, he said simply. Her breath caught painfully. Teachers were still watching. Parents were still smiling. The bus doors hissed open in the distance. Daylight held them all hostage. And standing there, trapped between witness and truth, with her child holding her hand, and the past standing inches away, she realized the most dangerous thing of all had already happened. He hadn't taken her child. He'd seen him. And some truths, once seen in daylight, refused to return to the dark. He hadn't come reckless. That became clear the moment she realized he wasn't looking around anymore, not scanning exits, not assessing the crowd the way men from his world usually did when they stepped into unfamiliar territory. He already knew the terrain. He already knew the risk, and he'd come anyway. The other parents slowly drifted back to their routines, attention shifting as teachers herded children toward the buses, and volunteers checked names against lists. The dangerous thing about daylight wasn't visibility. It was distraction. Life continuing, as if nothing seismic had just cracked the ground beneath her feet. Her son still stood between them, small fingers looped through hers, his backpack hanging crookedly off one shoulder. He looked up at the man again, curiosity replacing the earlier uncertainty. You're the one who paid for the trip, he said. Not accusing. Just stating a fact, the way children did when organizing the world into neat categories. Yes, the man replied. His tone softened in a way that unsettled her more than coldness ever could. I wanted you all to go somewhere special. Her chest tightened. So careful. So intentional. He wasn't here to declare anything. He wasn't here to demand explanations or pull the boy close in some dramatic reclaiming. He was here to be certain. A teacher approached, smiling. Sir, thank you again for your generosity. It really means a lot to the kids. He inclined his head politely. It's my pleasure. Nothing about his posture suggested power, and yet authority clung to him like gravity. The teacher lingered a second longer than necessary before moving away again, her instincts responding to something her mind hadn't named. She felt sick. Her son squeezed her hand. Mama, can I go line up? Stay, she said, sharper than she meant to. He frowned. But, please, she added quietly. He nodded. He always did. Too perceptive. Too accommodating. Another inherited trait she wished she could deny. The man waited. That too was intentional. When the crowd finally thinned enough that only a few parents lingered nearby, he spoke again. Lower now, just for her. I know when he was born. Her heart dropped. I know which hospital, he continued, voice controlled. I know the storm knocked out power for 6 hours. I know a nurse falsified discharge paperwork and erased a name she was told never to write down. Her vision blurred. I know you left before sunrise with a newborn wrapped in borrowed blankets, and I know you didn't put his name on the birth registry until months later. She stared at him, barely breathing. You shouldn't know any of that, she whispered. He studied her, and for the first time she saw something raw break through his discipline. Pain, long buried and never dealt with. I didn't want to, he said quietly, but information has a way of finding me. Her son shifted, sensing tension even if he didn't understand it. She crouched slightly, brushing her thumb over his knuckles. How long? She demanded softly, lifting her eyes to the man again. He didn't deflect, didn't soften the truth. Long enough to be sure, he said. Not long enough to interfere before I was. Before you were what? She asked bitterly. Allowed, he replied. The word landed heavily. She shook her head. You don't get to rewrite the past because it's convenient now. It's not convenient, he said immediately. It's devastating. Silence stretched. Her son cleared his throat. Are you mad at my mom? Both adults froze. The man looked down at the child, something unguarded flickering across his face. No, he said without hesitation. I'm not mad at her. Okay, her son accepted easily, then tilted his head. You look like me. Her pulse roared in her ears. The man didn't smile, didn't deflect. Yes, he said softly. You do. Her breath hitched. That was it. No denial, no euphemism, no story woven to soften the blow. Just truth. His gaze lifted to hers again, steady, grounded. I didn't come to accuse you, he said quietly. I came because I needed to look at him with my own eyes, to know if what the record suggested was real. And now? She asked. Now? He said, glancing at the boy once more, something fierce and protective settling into his bones. I know. Fear curled sharp and hot in her chest. And what do you plan to do with that knowledge? He stepped back half a pace, deliberately creating space rather than claiming it. I won't force anything, he said. Not today. Not ever. Her lips trembled. Men like you don't do nothing. He met her gaze, unwavering. Men like me prepare. The bus door slammed shut nearby. Children's laughter echoed as engines turned over. Normal life pressed in around them again. But understand this, he added gently, eyes never leaving hers. I didn't come to test you. I came to test myself. And, she whispered, his voice was barely audible, I will never walk away from my child. The words weren't a threat. They were a fact. And standing there under the open sky, with teachers watching and parents smiling, and her son holding her hand, she knew the truth she'd spent years burying had reached the surface at last. Not with violence, not with anger, but with preparation. And that scared her more than anything else ever had. It happened slowly, not the way danger usually did, with shouting or sharp movements, or the sudden sense of being trapped. This was quieter, softer, almost ordinary, which somehow made it more devastating. Her son let go of her hand. The loss of that small, warm weight sent a shock through her body. Wait, she started, but the word came out tangled and thin, already too late. He took one step forward, just one. The man stiffened instantly, not with fear, but restraint. His shoulders stayed loose, his expression neutral, but something fierce and startled flared in his eyes. The child looked up at him, head tilted slightly to one side in that familiar way she'd seen 1,000 times when he was trying to understand something new. Do you drive those cars? He asked, pointing toward the black vehicles lining the street. A few parents within earshot chuckled. The man exhaled, slow and deliberate. Sometimes. They're shiny, her son observed seriously. They are, he agreed, a hint of warmth threading his voice despite himself. Her heart hammered painfully in her chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Not like this. Not in daylight with witnesses and laughter, and the fragile safety of normalcy layered over something so raw. Her son studied him again, unblinking. Children didn't know how to fake indifference. When they were curious, they were openly, inconveniently curious. You look important, he continued. The man's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. That's what people say. Are you important to my mom? Silence dropped like a held breath. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. God! The man didn't look at her. Not immediately. When he did, his gaze was asking. Not claiming. Waiting instead of taking. Yes, he said quietly. I am. Her son considered that. Then nodded, satisfied. Okay. Okay, that simple acceptance struck harder than any accusation ever could. He took another step closer, stopping at a respectful distance, eyes never leaving the man's face. Not wary, not frightened, just observant. You're not scary, he added after a moment. People who want to scare you make loud noises. Something inside the man fractured. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, in the barely perceptible inhale through his nose. Decades of control, of carefully constructed distance, suddenly tested by 8 years of innocence and instinct. He crouched slightly, just enough to be on the boy's level without imposing. I don't want to scare you, he said. The words were simple, honest. Maybe the truest thing he'd ever said out loud. Her son's eyes flicked to his hands. Your hands are big. They are. Mine will be big too, the boy decided. The man swallowed. Yes, he said softly. They will. She watched it happen. This quiet recognition moving through him, not of power or bloodline, but of continuity. Of something forward-facing instead of backward, something alive instead of lost. The boy smiled, shy but open. My mom says big hands are good for fixing things. That did it. The crack became visible then, not dramatic, not explosive. Just a flicker of something he'd buried too deeply to ever expect to feel again. Hope. I fix things, he said hoarsely. Her son brightened. Like bikes? Yes, he replied, throat tight. Even bikes. The boy nodded, impressed. Then, without asking permission, he did the unthinkable. He reached out. Not to grab. Not to cling. Just to touch. Small fingers brushing the back of the man's hand like a test, A question offered without fear. The man didn't move, didn't flinch. He stared at that contact as if it were sacred. She felt tears sting her eyes. This was the moment she'd feared for years. The exact second when inheritance became undeniable, not through resemblance or paperwork, but connection. The boy pulled his hand back, satisfied. "You're warm." The man nodded, unable to trust his voice. "I have to go now," her son announced suddenly, glancing toward the buses. "Ms. Carter will be mad if I'm late." He turned back to the man, serious. "You can't come on the trip, though. Only kids and teachers." "I know," the man said. The boy paused, then smiled again. "You can come another time." Another time. The possibility hung in the air like a fragile promise. Then he turned and trotted back to her side, slipping his hand into hers like nothing monumental had just occurred. "I like him," her son whispered as they started walking. "He listens." Her heart broke wide open. She dared a glance back. The man was still crouched there, staring at his hand like it had been branded with something irreversible. When he looked up, his eyes met hers again. Whatever negotiations she'd expected, demands, power plays, ultimatums, were nowhere to be found. There was only this truth, laid bare in daylight. The boy wasn't afraid. And because of that, the most dangerous thing imaginable had just happened. The man she once ran from had found something worth tearing the world apart to protect. The hallway smelled like crayons and disinfectant. That was the detail that grounded her. The childish, waxy sweetness layered over industrial clean. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. It reminded her where they were, who was watching, even when they weren't visible, why every word had to be careful. The walls were crowded with drawings taped at uneven angles, stick figure families, lopsided houses, sons with smiling faces. Her son's art was there too. She recognized it instantly. Darker lines, more space between figures, a tree drawn with roots carefully shaded instead of leaves. He'd always noticed what was underground. She stood too close to the wall, arms folded tight across her chest, listening to her own pulse thunder in her ears. Down the hallway, teachers shepherded the last of the children toward the buses, voices bright and sing-song. It was the sound of safety pretending it was permanent. He stood opposite her, back to a bulletin board announcing a bake sale fundraiser. The contrast almost made her laugh. Him, all tailored control and violence held in restraint, framed by glitter letters and construction paper cupcakes. Neither of them spoke at first. This was the conversation that had waited years. Not for the right moment. There was no right moment for truth like this. It had waited for inevitability. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered finally. "I know," he replied just as softly. "You promised," she said, the words sharp despite the hush. "You promised to let me go." His jaw tightened. "I did." "No," she shot back, eyes burning. "You promised you wouldn't look for me." "And I didn't," he said. "Not then." Her breath hitched. "That's not comfort. It's the truth." She looked down at the scuffed linoleum floor, afraid of what she'd see if she met his eyes. Afraid of the memories that lived there. Afraid of the part of her that still reacted to his presence like gravity. "I didn't do it to hurt you," she whispered. "I know," he said immediately, too quickly, as if he'd rehearsed that answer for years. Her fingers curled inward. "You don't know what it was like. That night, the storm, the hospital. They lost power. I was alone." Her voice cracked despite her effort. "I didn't know if we'd both survive." His breath stilled. "They told me it was safer if no one knew," she continued. "They weren't wrong. Your world doesn't forgive children. It uses them." "That world is why I let you go," he said quietly. Her head snapped up. "Then why does it feel like you're taking everything back now?" He took a step closer, careful, conscious of the cameras, the teachers passing at the far end of the hall. "Because I didn't let you go. Because I stopped loving you, he whispered. I let you go because loving you was going to kill you. Her throat closed. I told myself that not knowing was the price, he continued. That ignorance was mercy. I buried it. I survived it. Did you? She asked bitterly. His silence was answer enough. A burst of laughter echoed from outside as a bus door slammed shut. Time was slipping. Always slipping. You had no right, she said more softly. You don't just get to reappear. I didn't come to reappear, he said. I came because the truth found me. And once I saw him, his voice faltered, just barely. I can't unknow him. She pressed her palm to her mouth, steadying her breathing. He has a life, friends, safety. And I won't break that, he said. I won't touch his routine. I won't introduce chaos where you built calm. Her eyes lifted, searching his face for manipulation. What do you want? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. I want to know him, he said at last, on your terms. Slowly, if you allow it. And me? She asked, almost against her will. His eyes softened, something aching and familiar surfacing. I want you to stop carrying this alone. She shook her head. That's not something you get to fix. I know, he said. But I can stand beside you while you decide. Footsteps approached. A teacher glanced their way politely, then continued on. This place, these crayon drawings and pastel walls, wasn't built for conversations like this. It resisted them, absorbed them, forced them into whispers. She drew a shaky breath. If this brings danger to him, I will disappear, he said without hesitation. That surprised her. You won't like it, he added. You won't believe it, but I will. She held his gaze now, really seeing him. Not the man who terrified cities, not the ghost of her past, but the one standing in a school hallway, voice lowered so as not to frighten children. This doesn't end neatly, she said. No, he agreed, but it ends honestly. Silence settled again. Then, from outside, her son's voice floated in through an open door, laughing as he called her name. Her whole body turned toward the sound. That's my life, she said, eyes bright with tears. I didn't build it to punish you. I know, he said softly. You built it to save him. She looked back at him one last time, this man tied forever to the truth she'd hidden. This conversation isn't over, she whispered. He inclined his head. I've waited years. I can wait longer. But as she turned to go, to step back into daylight and motherhood and fragile routine, she knew the waiting part was over. The truths had collided, and nothing drawn in crayon could cover the cracks they'd made. He didn't call that night. She half expected him to. Some quiet message, some carefully worded assurance delivered through a secure line. That would have fit the man she remembered. Controlled, strategic, always negotiating from the shadows. But silence stretched instead. And in that silence, fear grew teeth. By the next afternoon, she had worked herself into a careful kind of panic. The kind that kept movements precise and voice calm while her mind ran every possible exit strategy. She picked her son up from school early, walked him home by a different route, locked the door behind them with more force than necessary. Nothing happened. No black cars, no men watching corners. No threats disguised as kindness. It made her uneasy. The knock came just before dinner. 3 clean taps. Polite. Official. Her breath hitched. Mama, her son called from the table. Is someone here? Stay where you are, she said automatically, her voice steady even as her pulse roared. She checked the peephole. Not him. A woman stood on the other side, mid-40s, impeccably dressed but not flashy. Hair pulled back tight. Eyes sharp and assessing without being unkind. A professional. She opened the door cautiously, chain still latched. Yes? My name is Elena, the woman said calmly. I represent Mr. Moretti. The name landed heavy in her chest. She hated how familiar it still felt. He asked me to deliver something in person, Elena continued, and to answer any questions you might have. What kind of something? She asked. The woman lifted a leather folder into view. No weapons, no theatrics. Protection, Elena said simply. She exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding and unlatched the chain. They sat at her small kitchen table while her son colored quietly at the far end, humming to himself. Elena waited until he was distracted, then lowered her voice. This is not custody, not money, not leverage, she said carefully. This is a public declaration of responsibility. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were documents she never expected to see with his name on them. A registered trust, a publicly listed philanthropic foundation under his legal business entities, a formal security arrangement filed with the city under corporate auspices, tied to the foundation's work in educational access and community safety. No shell companies, no shadows, clean enough to withstand scrutiny. Her hands shook as she turned the pages. He's placing you and your son under the foundation's umbrella, Elena explained. School trips, scholarships, relocation options if necessary. All filed. All official. Her throat tightened. People will notice. Yes, Elena agreed. That is the point. She looked up sharply. Why? Elena held her gaze. Because secrecy invites predators. Visibility deters them. That landed hard. He has enemies, the woman continued. But he also has accountability. Public attention narrows the space in which harm can hide. Her fingers curled around the folder. And the catch? Elena didn't smile. There is no catch. She scoffed quietly. Men like him don't make gifts without costs. This is not a gift, Elena said. It is a statement. A statement to whom? To the world. To anyone watching. To anyone thinking. I won't be owned, she said softly. You won't be, Elena replied immediately. The documents guarantee autonomy. Your consent is required for everything. And him? She pressed. Where does he stand? Elena hesitated just long enough to be honest. He stands publicly. That made her chest ache. He could have hidden this, Elena continued. He chose not to. This makes him visible, too. Irreversible? Her son suddenly looked up. Mama, who's that? She swallowed and glanced at Elena, who smiled kindly. Hello there. I'm a friend. Are you from the trip? He asked, eyes bright. Yes, Elena said easily. Something like that. The child beamed, then went back to coloring. She closed the folder slowly. And if I refuse? She asked. Elena met her eyes. Then the offer expires. No pressure. No retaliation. Silence filled the kitchen. This wasn't a rescue disguised as control. This was him stepping into the light and saying, Look here. She thought of the hallway, the crayon drawings. Why can't he tell me himself? She asked. He didn't want to corner you, Elena said, and he didn't want your answer influenced by his presence. She let out a shaky breath. I need time, she said. You have it, Elena replied, rising. But understand this. He didn't make this offer to win you back. She paused at the door. He made it to make it clear the world will have to go through him to reach your child. The door closed softly behind her. Her son padded over, holding up his drawing. Mama, I made us. She took it with trembling hands. 3 stick figures. One taller, one small, one slightly apart but close. Her chest clenched. Public. Clean. Irreversible. For the first time since the storm that split her world open, protection hadn't come with a hidden blade. And that terrified her more than any threat ever had. She felt it before anything actually happened. That low, crawling awareness along her spine that told her the world had tilted. Just a few degrees, barely noticeable to anyone else, but enough to send everything sliding. The next morning, the school felt different. Nothing obvious. The same brick building. The same murals painted by volunteers years ago. The same drop-off routine with backpacks and hurried kisses, and parents checking their watches. But the air had weight. She noticed it in the way the crossing guard glanced down the street twice instead of once, in the unfamiliar black sedan parked legally, but lingering far longer than necessary. In the way one of the teachers stiffened when a man she didn't recognize asked about donation schedules and left without taking a pamphlet. Eyes were everywhere, not watching the school, watching her. She kept her smile in place as she walked her son inside, fingers brushing his hair, memorizing the shape of his head the way she always did when fear crept in. He chatted about the science museum, about dinosaur bones and vending machines, and whether sharks were older than trees. Ordinary things, the kind of things Danger loved to stalk. "Mama," he said suddenly, glancing back toward the street. "That car was here yesterday, too." Her breath caught for half a second before she forced calm into her voice. "Some people have busy schedules." He frowned. "They don't look busy." Perceptive. Too perceptive. "Go on," she said gently. "Ms. Carter's waiting." He hesitated, then nodded and ran inside, trusting her to handle whatever grown-up thing lingered in the shadows. She waited until the doors closed behind him before exhaling. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. Unknown number. Again. This one didn't pretend politeness. "You should leave." Her heart slammed. She didn't respond. A second message followed. Visibility cuts both ways. Her fingers trembled as she slid the phone into her bag and turned slowly, scanning the street with her senses instead of her eyes. You didn't survive years of fear by panicking first. You survived by observing. Across the road, a man leaned against a lamppost, pretending to scroll. Too still. Too aware. Down the block, the black sedan idled again, engine low, windows tinted deeper than necessary. None of them approached. That was the message. She walked home the long way, doubling back once, watching reflections in storefront glass, counting footsteps that didn't belong to her. When she locked the door behind her, she leaned into it, palms flat against the wood, chest tight. He had been right. Public meant protected, but it also meant provocation. Somewhere, someone had taken notes at the school. Someone had clocked the boy's face, the timing of the donor's visit, the foundation's announcement that quietly followed. Bloodlines made men reckless, and legacy made them cruel. Her phone rang. This time, she answered. "I see them," she said without preamble. His voice was calm, controlled, but sharpened now, all the softness she'd heard before replaced by steel. "I know," he replied. "I told you this wouldn't be invisible." "I didn't say I wanted invisible," she said, anger slicing through her fear. "I said I wanted safe." "You have that," he said, "for now." She closed her eyes. "For now" doesn't comfort mothers. Silence stretched just long enough for her to picture his jaw tightening wherever he was. "No," he agreed quietly. "It doesn't." "What do they want?" she asked. "They want to confirm what I already know," he said, "and to see whether I hesitate." "Do you?" His answer came without pause. "Never." She sank into a chair, gripping the edge of the table. "You said you wouldn't take over our lives." "I'm not," he said. "But I will end anyone who threatens them." The word "end" sat heavy in the air between them. "You're angry," she said. "Yes," he admitted. "But I'm also precise." She swallowed. "Then be precise with me. What happens next?" "There will be pressure," he said. "Indirect at first. People sniffing for weaknesses, testing reactions." "And us?" "You stay boring," he said. "School, work, routines. Let them underestimate that." A pause. "I won't send men unless I have to." "Unless you force me," went unspoken. She looked at the empty chair where her son usually sprawled after school, shoes kicked off, stories spilling out of him like sunlight. "They're not looking at him yet," she whispered. "No," he said. "They're looking at me." That should have reassured her. Instead, it terrified her. Because wars didn't start with gunshots. They started with watching. And as she hung up the phone, staring out the window at a world pretending to be ordinary, she understood the truth with chilling clarity. The school had been the spark, but the fire was already spreading. And somewhere beyond her sight, enemies were learning her child's name, not yet with intent, but with interest. Which was always worse. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror long after the house had gone quiet, studying a version of herself she barely recognized. Not because she looked different, she didn't. Same tired eyes, same faint scar near her temple, from a fall years ago she never fully explained. Same hands that had learned how to pack quickly and leave quietly. But something inside her had shifted. Fear had always been a private thing, a discipline, a way of life. She had learned how to fold it inward, how to let it sharpen her instincts instead of breaking her. Hiding had been survival. Silence had been love, until it wasn't. She thought of the way her son had stepped forward without hesitation, the way he had touched that man's hand, curiosity outweighing caution, the way he had walked back to her afterward, utterly certain she would keep him safe, not by disappearing, but by standing. Children always knew when hiding started to rot. She tucked him into bed that night more carefully than usual, brushing her fingers through his hair until his breathing slowed and evened out. "Mama?" he murmured, half asleep. "Is the nice man coming back?" Her throat tightened. "Yes," she said softly, "but only if you're okay with that." He yawned. "Okay, just like that. No fear, no confusion. Trust." Afterward, she stood alone in the living room, phone heavy in her hand. The city outside hummed with ordinary life, cars passing, footsteps on pavement, voices drifting upward through open windows. Life didn't pause for revelations. It expected you to adapt. She typed the message slowly, deliberately. "I'm done running." The response came almost immediately. "Are you sure?" She smiled faintly. "Yes." A pause. Then, "Tell me what you need." The question was different this time. No strategy layered beneath it. No control. Just space. She inhaled. "I need you to stand with us. Not over us. Not in front of us. With us." Time stretched thin. Then, "That's how families work." The word settled into her chest with unexpected weight. Family. She had avoided it for years, afraid of how easily it could be taken away, afraid that naming it would curse it. But family had existed all along, in nightly routines, packed lunches, whispered reassurances during storms. It had just been incomplete. 2 days later, she walked into the school office without flinching. Parents looked up as she passed. Teachers smiled politely. The usual background noise of life continued, but she felt different, anchored instead of exposed. The principal greeted her warmly. "We've updated the donor acknowledgement on the website," she said. "The foundation has requested a photo opportunity next week. Only if you're comfortable, of course." She nodded. "We are." The word felt strange on her tongue. We. That afternoon, the black cars returned, but this time they didn't linger in shadows. They parked openly. Doors opened. Men stepped out with nothing to hide because hiding was no longer the point. He waited across the street, not approaching until she and her son stepped out together. Her son spotted him first and waved with the reckless joy of someone who had decided the world made room for things like this. The man's composure cracked just a little. She crossed the street slowly, every step deliberate. This wasn't surrender. This was choice. "I don't want secrets anymore," she said before he could speak. Not from him. Not from the world. His gaze was steady, solemn. You won't have them. They'll watch us, she said. Judge us. I know. They'll test boundaries. They already are. She looked at him fully now. And you? I'll be visible, he said. Accountable, present. Her son slipped his hand into both of theirs, anchoring them together without ceremony. No announcement, no dramatic moment. Just truth, claiming space. Cameras clicked from a polite distance. Someone called his name. Another parent smiled uncertainly, curiosity buzzing beneath the surface. The family that had never been supposed to exist stood there anyway. Not hidden, not protected by lies, protected by daylight. She realized then that fear had always demanded silence, but love didn't. Love asked for courage, for presence, for the willingness to let the world see you and decide anyway. That night, they walked home together. No shadows stretching ahead, no corners to disappear into, and for the first time in years, she didn't scan for exits. Because hiding had been a chapter, and it was over.